His name was Ethan Hale. He was 34 years old, and after 7 brutal years of 16-hour shifts in the oil fields of Saudi Arabia, he had finally saved enough to come home for good. The taxi pulled up to the charming Craftsman bungalow on Willow Creek Lane, the house he'd bought with his signing bonus before leaving for that first contract. And Ethan felt his pulse quicken with a mixture of excitement and something else he couldn't quite name. He'd wanted to surprise Lena. No text message, no FaceTime warning, just show up with his duffel bag and that crooked smile she used to trace with her fingertips. They'd video called religiously for the first 3 years, but the calls had tapered off recently. She'd said the time difference was killing her sleep schedule, that her new marketing job demanded early mornings. He'd understood. He'd always understood. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the neighborhood, the kind of golden hour light that made everything look like a homecoming commercial. Ethan paid the driver $63 from the airport and stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, just staring at what was supposed to be his sanctuary, their future. The house looked different. Better, actually. The lawn was pristine, edges sharp enough to cut paper. New stone pavers created a winding path to the front door. The exterior had been transformed from the faded blue-gray, he remembered, to a sophisticated charcoal with crisp white trim and black shutters. Modern outdoor lighting fixtures flanked the entrance. A sleek security camera blinked red above the doorframe. It looked expensive. It looked like someone with taste and money lived there. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He told himself it was pride. Lena had clearly taken care of things. Maybe her career had really taken off. Maybe the sacrifices were finally paying dividends for both of them. But something fell off. He climbed the new stone steps, noting the potted succulents arranged with designer precision on either side of the door. Lena had always killed plants. She'd joked that she had a brown thumb, that even cacti withered under her care. His hand reached for the doorknob, the same brass handle he'd installed himself before leaving, now polished to a mirror shine. It turned easily. Unlocked. That should have been his first red flag. Lena had been paranoid about security, especially after he left. She'd made him install 3 deadbolts before his flight. Now the door opened with just a twist, no resistance, like someone who felt completely safe, or like someone expecting someone. Ethan pushed the door open slowly, dragging his duffel bag across the threshold. His mouth opened to call out, "Honey, I'm home." He'd rehearsed it on the 14-hour flight. Imagine her face, her tears, her arms around his neck. But the words dissolved on his tongue. The living room he'd left behind, their thrift store sofa with a worn armrest, the coffee table they'd built together from a YouTube tutorial, the mismatched bookshelf holding Lena's true crime paperbacks and his fantasy novels, was gone. Completely erased. In its place stood a curated showroom. A sectional sofa in dove gray velvet that probably cost more than his first car. A glass coffee table with a marble base, artfully arranged with designed books he knew Lena would never read. The walls, once covered in their travel photos and concert posters, now displayed large abstract canvases in muted tones, the kind of art that whispered money instead of shouting personality. The old carpet had been ripped out and replaced with wide plank hardwood floors that gleamed under recessed lighting. New ceiling fixtures. New everything. Even the smell was different. Not Lena's vanilla candles or the lavender oil she used to diffuse. This was something masculine and expensive, bergamot maybe, or sandalwood. Something chosen by someone else. Ethan's duffel bag slipped from his grip, hitting the floor with a dull thud. His confusion lasted exactly 5 seconds before he heard it. Music, low and jazzy, coming from upstairs. Not Lena's usual pop playlists or true crime podcasts. And underneath the music, voices. Lena's voice, that familiar laugh he'd carried in his memory for 7 years. And another voice, deeper, male, saying something that made her laugh again, that intimate, breathless laugh that used to be reserved for him alone. Ethan's legs moved without conscious decision. Up the stairs he'd climbed 1,000 times in his mind. Down the hallway past the guest room they'd planned to convert into a nursery someday. Past the bathroom where Lena used to steal his t-shirts and leave wet towels on the floor. Toward their bedroom door. The door stood slightly ajar. Just a crack. Just enough. Through that narrow opening, Ethan saw the end of everything he'd worked for. Lena, his wife of 9 years, the woman he'd sacrificed 7 years for, lay in bed. Their bed, except it wasn't their bed anymore. This was a California king with a tufted headboard that probably required a furniture truck to deliver. She wore silk pajamas he'd never seen, her hair styled in a way she'd never worn it for him. And beside her, propped against pillows that matched the expensive duvet, sat a man who looked like he'd walked out of a luxury lifestyle magazine. Tall, fit, wearing designer loungewear and a watch that caught the late afternoon light. A Patek Philippe, Ethan's brain registered automatically, the kind that costs more than a year of his salary. The man's hand rested casually on Lena's knee, like it belonged there. Like he belonged there. Ethan, Lena's voice shattered the moment like dropped crystal. If you want to see what happens next, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment below telling me what you think Ethan should do, and don't forget to like this video. It helps us bring you more stories like this one. Ethan stood frozen in the entryway, his duffel bag at his feet like an anchor he couldn't lift. Nothing was the same. The couch, their couch, the one they'd spent an entire Saturday afternoon assembling while drinking cheap wine and laughing at the incomprehensible IKEA instructions, was gone. In its place sat a pristine leather sectional in charcoal gray, the kind with clean lines and chrome legs that belonged in an architecture magazine, not a home where people actually lived. The coffee table they'd found at a flea market, the one with the small water stain for where Lena had left her mug too long, had been replaced by a sleek glass and metal piece that looked like it cost more than his entire month's salary. On top of it sat 3 hardcover books arranged with disturbing precision. Titles about minimalist living and Scandinavian design, books that existed to be seen, not read. Ethan's eyes traveled to the far wall. The bookshelf where Lena kept her true crime paperbacks and he'd stacked his dog-eared fantasy novels, where their tastes had collided in beautiful chaos, had vanished. Instead, a built-in entertainment center housed a massive flat-screen television, at least 75 inches, surrounded by integrated shelving displaying carefully curated objects. A ceramic vase, a small bronze sculpture, books with spines color-coordinated in gradients of cream and gray. The walls themselves had been transformed. Gone were the concert posters from shows they'd attended together, the framed photos from their road trip to Big Sur, the quirky art prints they'd collected from local street fairs. Now, large abstract canvases in muted tones dominated the space. The kind of art that whispered wealth and sophistication, but said absolutely nothing about the people who lived beneath it. Even the floors had changed. The worn beige carpet that had cushioned their footsteps, that had caught crumbs from countless movie nights and pizza dinners, had been torn out. In its place stretched wide plank hardwood in a dark walnut finish, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the recessed lighting overhead. The ceiling fixtures, simple, functional pieces he'd installed himself, had been replaced with modern geometric chandeliers that probably required professional installation. Everything gleamed. Everything matched. Everything looked expensive, but nothing looked like them. Nothing looked like home. The space felt staged, like those model homes developers show to prospective buyers, where everything is positioned to suggest a lifestyle rather than reflect an actual life. Beautiful, yes. Aspirational, certainly, but impersonal. Cold, like a magazine spread titled Modern Living that no one actually lived in. Ethan took a step forward, his boots, scuffed and dusty from the oil fields, suddenly feeling obscene against the pristine floors. He didn't belong here. That was the message the room screamed at him in silent, sophisticated tones. He waited for anger. That's what should come next, right? Rage at the audacity of erasing their shared history. Fury at the money spent. His money. The money he'd earned through 7 years of exile and sacrifice. But the anger didn't come. Instead, he felt displacement, like he'd walked into the right address, but the wrong dimension. Like he was a ghost haunting a future that had proceeded without him. A future where he'd already been erased and replaced with someone else's vision of success. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Not from upstairs where he'd heard the voices, but from down the hallway toward the kitchen. Soft footsteps, unhurried, the sound of bare feet on hardwood. Not rushed, not panicked, just casual, like someone moving through their own space with complete comfort and familiarity. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. A man emerged from the hallway. He was tall, probably 6'2", with the kind of build that came from expensive gym memberships and personal trainers, not manual labor. He wore designer loungewear, fitted joggers, and a premium t-shirt that probably cost what Ethan used to spend on groceries for a week. His hair was perfectly styled in that effortlessly tousled way that actually required significant effort. A sophisticated watch caught the light on his wrist. The man stopped when he saw Ethan, but he didn't startle, didn't jump or freeze or show any sign of fear or guilt. He just looked mildly surprised, the way you might look if you found an unexpected package on your doorstep. "Can I help you?" the man asked. His voice was calm, measured, with a slight edge of territorial concern. Not aggressive, just questioning. The tone of someone who belonged here and was encountering someone who didn't. That's when Ethan understood. This wasn't a secret fling hidden in shame and stolen moments. This wasn't some guilty affair conducted in shadows while hoping the husband overseas never found out. This was someone living here. The man's comfort in the space was absolute. He moved through it like he knew where every light switch was, like he'd chosen the furniture, like he paid the bills. There was no panic in his eyes, no scrambling for explanations or excuses. He stood there in designer loungewear, in the home Ethan had bought, looking at Ethan like an intruder. Because in this version of reality, the one that had been constructed over 7 years while Ethan sweated in desert heat and counted days until he could return, Ethan was the intruder. The man tilted his head slightly, still waiting for an answer, his posture relaxed but alert. And somewhere upstairs, Ethan could hear movement now. Hurried footsteps. Lena's voice, muffled but urgent, calling out a name that wasn't Ethan's. The house no longer recognized him. And maybe, Ethan realized with a sinking sensation in his gut, neither did his wife. What would you do in Ethan's position? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you're invested in this story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. And if this chapter gave you chills, smash that like button. Let's continue this journey together. Ethan stood in the center of what used to be his living room, his pulse thundering in his ears, when he heard the bedroom door open upstairs. Footsteps, quick but controlled. Then she appeared. Lena emerged at the end of the upstairs hallway, framed by the natural light pouring through the window, behind her like some cruel spotlight. She wore a silk robe in deep emerald green, the kind with delicate lace trim at the collar and cuffs, the kind that whispered luxury and leisure, the kind he'd never seen before, the kind he'd certainly never bought her. Her hair was different too, no longer the practical ponytail she used to wear around the house, but styled in loose waves that fell past her shoulders. Even her skin seemed to glow differently, like she'd been taking better care of herself, or like someone had been taking care of her. She froze the moment she saw him. But it wasn't the freeze of someone caught cheating, that desperate deer-in-headlights paralysis of guilt and shame. This was different. She looked startled, yes, but more like someone who'd been interrupted during something private rather than someone caught doing something wrong. Her face didn't collapse into panic. Her eyes didn't well with tears. Her hand didn't fly to her mouth in horror. Instead, her features tightened. Her jaw set. Her eyes sharpened with what Ethan could only describe as calculation, like her mind was racing through scenarios, measuring responses, weighing options. "Ethan," she said, and his name in her mouth sounded strange. Not affectionate, not apologetic, just factual. Then movement behind her drew his attention. A man stepped into the hallway beside Lena. The same man from downstairs, Ethan realized, though he must have slipped past while Ethan was frozen in shock. The man had changed, now wearing dark jeans and a crisp button-down shirt rolled at the sleeves, like he was getting ready for a casual dinner out. His hair was perfectly styled. His jawline could cut glass. He placed a hand on Lena's lower back, not possessively but naturally. The kind of touch that spoke of countless repetitions, of muscle memory, of comfortable intimacy. The man didn't introduce himself right away. He didn't stumble over apologies or explanations. He just stood there beside Lena, tall and composed, his presence filling the space with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged exactly where he was standing. Ethan noticed how close they stood, not the careful distance of conspirators caught in wrongdoing, but the easy proximity of two people who shared space every day, their bodies angled toward each other slightly, that unconscious choreography that develops between couples who've learned each other's rhythms. The man's hand remained on Lena's back, and she didn't flinch away from it, didn't create distance, didn't perform the theater of guilt. Lena, Ethan finally managed, his voice sounding hollow in the cavernous space of the redesigned living room. What's going on? She descended the stairs slowly, the silk robe flowing around her legs. The man followed a step behind, his hand dropping from her back, but his presence remaining close, protective even. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she stopped about 10 feet away from Ethan, close enough to speak clearly, far enough to maintain separation. She opened her mouth, closed it. Her eyes flickered to the man behind her, then back to Ethan. Then she spoke, and the words landed like a physical blow. You weren't supposed to find out like this. Not I'm sorry. Not I can explain. Not this isn't what it looks like. You weren't supposed to find out like this. The sentence hung in the air between them, each word carefully chosen, each syllable weighted with implication. Ethan felt something crack inside his chest. Not his heart. That would come later. This was something deeper, the foundation of his understanding of reality. Because that sentence told him everything. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a lapse in judgment during a lonely year. This wasn't something that had spiraled out of control before she could stop it. This was planned. The like this implied there had been another plan, a better plan, a more controlled revelation. She'd thought about how to tell him. She'd prepared for the conversation. She just hadn't prepared for him to show up unannounced at his own home. You weren't supposed to find out like this meant there was a timeline, a script, a version of events where she maintained control of the narrative, where she could frame the story on her terms, in her timing. It meant this had been going on long enough that she'd mapped out an exit strategy. It meant she'd made a choice, not in a moment of passion, but through calculated decision-making over weeks, months, maybe years. Ethan stared at his wife, this woman he'd sacrificed 7 years for. This woman he'd endured sandstorms and loneliness and brutal labor for, and he realized he was looking at a stranger. How long? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lena glanced at the man beside her again. Some silent communication passed between them. Permission, maybe your support. Ethan, she started, and there was something almost like pity in her voice now, which somehow made it worse. A lot has changed. We need to talk, but how long? He repeated, louder this time. The man stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Lena. Not threateningly, but protectively. The gesture was so natural, so rehearsed through repetition, that Ethan knew immediately this wasn't new. Maybe we should all sit down, the man said, his voice calm and reasonable, like he was mediating a business meeting rather than standing in the wreckage of someone else's marriage. Ethan looked from the man to Lena, to the expensive furniture surrounding them, to the designer life that had been built in his absence. This wasn't a transition he was supposed to witness. This was supposed to be clean, controlled, convenient. But he was here now, standing in the ruins of everything he'd believed in, and there was no script for what happened next. Is Lena's betrayal justified, or is Ethan the victim here? Drop your opinion in the comments. I want to hear what you think. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. And if you're feeling this story, hit that like button right now. This is just the beginning. The man extended his hand, and the gesture was so casually professional it made Ethan's skin crawl. Marcus Reed, he said, his voice smooth and practiced. I'm a legal consultant. I think we should all sit down and discuss this rationally. Legal consultant, not Lena's boyfriend. Not the guy who's been sleeping in your bed. Legal consultant. Ethan stared at the outstretched hand, but didn't take it. Marcus withdrew it without awkwardness, as if he'd expected the rejection, as if this too had been rehearsed. Lena moved toward the expensive leather sectional, gesturing for Ethan to sit. The audacity of it. Her inviting him to sit in his own house, on furniture he'd never chosen, would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating. "I'll stand," Ethan said flatly. Lena exchanged another glance with Marcus, then perched on the edge of the sofa, her silk robe arranged carefully around her legs. Marcus remained standing beside her, one hand resting on the back of the couch. A united front. "Ethan," Lena began, her voice taking on a tone he'd never heard before, measured, almost clinical. "I know this is a shock, but we've been handling things while you were away." "Handling things," Ethan repeated slowly. The distance was... She paused, searching for words that sounded practiced, unsustainable. "We grew apart. You knew that." The call stopped being meaningful. We were living separate lives. Marcus cleared his throat gently. "Mr. Hale, I think it's important we address the legal realities of the situation." "Legal realities?" Ethan's voice remained eerily calm. "You were legally divorced nearly a year ago," Marcus said, his tone perfectly neutral, like he was discussing a real estate transaction. "The final decree was issued on January 17th, default judgment." The words hit Ethan like physical blows, but he kept his face neutral, watching them both carefully. "Default judgment," he echoed. "Meaning I didn't contest it. Meaning you didn't respond to the filing," Marcus corrected, pulling out his phone and scrolling through what appeared to be documents. "Papers were sent to your last known address overseas. Multiple notices were filed. There were 3 scheduled hearings over the course of 6 months. You attended none of them." Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "I never received any papers. They were sent via certified mail to your work address in Saudi Arabia," Lena said, and there was something almost apologetic in her voice now, but it rang hollow. "We had confirmation of delivery. Someone signed for them," Marcus added, pulling up what looked like a tracking document. "The court considered you properly served." Ethan's mind raced back through the past year. The chaos of the oil fields, the transient nature of the work camps, the constant rotation of workers and mail handlers. Papers could easily have been signed for by someone else, filed away, lost in the administrative machinery of a massive operation. "I never saw them," Ethan said quietly. "Not one piece of paper." "That's unfortunate," Marcus said, though his tone suggested he didn't find it unfortunate at all. "But legally speaking, service was executed properly." The proceedings moved forward. "The house," Ethan said, looking around at the transformed space. "This house." Lena shifted uncomfortably. "It was part of the settlement. The property was transferred to me as part of the asset division." "Asset division." Ethan's voice remained flat, emotionless. "Of assets I earned. Community property state," Marcus interjected smoothly. "The house was purchased during the marriage. Under California law." "I kept sending money," Ethan interrupted, his eyes locked on Lena. "Every month. Direct deposit to our joint account." Even after January, Lena's composure cracked slightly. Just a flicker across her face. Marcus spoke before she could. "The account was restructured during the divorce proceedings. Payments continued to be received and were allocated according to the settlement agreement." "Settlement agreement I never signed." "Default judgments don't require mutual consent," Marcus explained, his patience seemingly infinite. "After proper service and adequate time for response, the court can proceed with the petitioner's proposed terms." Ethan felt the full weight of it settling over him like concrete. The money he'd sent home every month, money meant for their future, for the life they'd planned, had kept flowing even after the divorce. Kept flowing into an account that was no longer joint. Kept flowing to fund. His eyes traveled across the room again. The expensive furniture, the designer renovations, the hardwood floors and the custom lighting and the artwork that cost more than cars. "The renovations," he said slowly, "I funded them. The money you sent was deposited according to the settlement terms," Marcus said carefully. "How those funds were subsequently used is not specified in the decree." Ethan's laugh was bitter and sharp. "So I paid for all of this. I paid to erase myself from my own house." "Ethan, it wasn't like that," Lena started, but her voice lacked conviction. "What was it like then?" He turned to face her fully. Explain to me what it was like. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you divorced me in secret, took the house I bought, spent the money I kept sending, and built a new life with him. He gestured toward Marcus. All while I was working 16-hour days in 120-degree heat thinking I was building our future. Lena's eyes dropped to her hands. Marcus remained impassive. Mr. Hale, I understand your emotional response, but everything that's occurred has been legally sound. If you'd like to contest the default judgment, you'll need to file a motion with grounds for. How long? Ethan cut him off, his voice dropping lower. How long have you two been together? Silence filled the room. That's not really relevant to the legal, Marcus began. How long? Lena finally looked up, and for the first time, Ethan saw something that might have been genuine emotion cross her face. Guilt, maybe, or just discomfort at having to say it out loud. 3 years, she whispered. 3 years. Half of his time overseas. Half of his sacrifice. Half of the phone calls where she'd told him she missed him, that she was proud of him, that they'd make it work. Ethan stood there in the center of the transformed living room, surrounded by furniture he'd unknowingly purchased for his replacement, and felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. They expected emotion. They expected rage, tears, pleading. He could see it in how they stood, in how Marcus had positioned himself protectively, in how Lena's hands were already raised slightly, as if to ward off an outburst. But Ethan had spent 7 years in one of the harshest environments on Earth. He'd learned patience, control, how to think clearly when everything around him was chaos. So he listened. He absorbed. He filed every detail away. And he said nothing. What should Ethan do next? Tell me in the comments. Should he fight back legally, walk away, or something else entirely? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because the next chapter is going to change everything. And if this story has you hooked, smash that like button right now. Ethan stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by the wreckage of 7 years of sacrifice, and felt an unnatural calm settle over him. Lena was watching him carefully, her body tense, waiting for the explosion. Marcus had shifted his stance slightly, ready to intervene if things turned physical. They both expected the scene, the yelling, the accusations, the emotional breakdown of a man confronting ultimate betrayal. But Ethan had learned something in 7 years of desert heat and brutal labor. The men who survived weren't the ones who reacted. They were the ones who observed, calculated, and moved with purpose. He bent down and picked up his duffel bag. The sound of the zipper seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence. Ethan, Lena's voice cracked slightly. Where are you going? He didn't answer. He turned toward the door, his movements calm and deliberate. Ethan, wait. We need to finish this conversation, she said, standing up from the sofa. There was something almost desperate in her voice now, like his silence was more frightening than anger. He paused at the door, his hand on the handle, the same brass handle he'd installed 7 years ago. He turned back to look at them one last time. Lena stood with her hands clasped in front of her, the silk robe suddenly looking less luxurious and more like a costume. Marcus remained by the sofa, his professional composure intact, but his eyes narrowed with something that might have been concern. There's nothing left to say, Ethan said quietly. You've explained everything. But we need to discuss next steps, the remaining financial. Marcus started. You'll hear from my attorney. Ethan interrupted, his voice still eerily calm. Then he walked out, closing the door behind him with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam. The sound of that door closing seemed to unsettle Lena more than any shouting match could have. Ethan could hear her voice rising behind him, muffled through the door. He's too calm. Marcus, he's too calm. Why isn't he angry? But Ethan was already down the new stone steps, past the designer landscaping, into the taxi he'd called while they were still talking. The hotel room was generic and impersonal. Beige walls, standard-issue furniture, the faint smell of industrial cleaning products. It was nothing like the showroom his house had become, and somehow that made it more honest. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, his duffel bag still packed beside him, and pulled out his laptop. Not to cry, not to drink himself into oblivion, not to call old friends and rage about what had happened. He opened a spreadsheet. Then he started documenting everything with the methodical precision he'd used to track equipment maintenance schedules in Saudi Arabia. Money transfers. Every single one. Date, amount, account number. 7 years of direct deposits lined up in neat columns. Travel schedules. Every rotation offshore. Every period when he was unreachable on the oil platforms. Every communication blackout during critical drilling operations. Messages. He downloaded every email, every text, every video call log. Timestamps. Duration. Content. He noted when Lena's responses had shifted from warm to perfunctory, when the I love yous had stopped, when the calls had become excuses rather than connections. He worked through the night, fueled by hotel coffee and cold clarity. By morning, patterns emerged. The divorce papers had been sent during a 6-week period when he'd been on a deep-water platform with zero internet access. The certified mail signature didn't match his handwriting. He pulled up old documents to compare. Court hearings had been scheduled during his rotation schedules, times when he was literally unreachable by any means except emergency satellite communication. And the money. His money. The spreadsheet showed deposits continuing for 11 months after the divorce decree. 11 months of his salary flowing into an account he no longer had access to, funding renovations he never approved. He made calls. Professional calls. No emotion, just information gathering. By noon, he'd hired Rebecca Chun, a forensic attorney who specialized in international divorce fraud and asset concealment. Her retainer cost him 3 months of salary, but her first question told him she was worth it. How convenient were the timing of these court dates relative to your work schedule? By evening, she'd brought in David Park, a financial analyst who traced money like other people trace genealogy. They worked for 3 days straight, breaking down every transaction, every document filing, every piece of communication. Then they found it. The emails to Ethan's work address hadn't been sent to his actual work email. They'd been sent to an outdated address from his first contract, an address that had been deactivated 4 years ago. Anyone with his current contact information would have known that. Lena had that information. She called him on his current work number dozens of times. The divorce documents had been filed strategically during periods when Ethan was offshore and unreachable, but someone would have needed access to his rotation schedule to know those dates. That schedule was confidential, shared only with emergency contacts. Lena had been his emergency contact. The renovation funds had been moved through shell accounts with innocuous names: Property Management Services, LLC, Home Improvement Consultants, Incorporated. David traced them through 3 layers of transactions. They weren't legitimate contracting companies. They were entities created specifically to move money. And then they found Marcus's name. Again, and again, and again. Marcus Reed wasn't just a legal consultant who happened to be sleeping with Ethan's wife. He was listed as the registered agent for 2 of the shell companies. His law firm had filed the divorce papers. His signature appeared on the property transfer documents. He'd been copied on emails about Ethan's offshore schedule. Emails sent from Lena's account to an address that appeared to be a scheduling coordinator but traced back to Marcus's office. Rebecca leaned back in her chair in Ethan's hotel room, now converted into a makeshift war room with documents covering every surface. "This wasn't personal," she said quietly, tapping her pen against the timeline they'd constructed on poster board. "Or it didn't start that way. This was systematic, calculated. Someone ran the numbers and realized you were a perfect target. Overseas, unreachable for long periods, steady income, owned property. They built a system to extract maximum value with minimum risk." "Marcus," Ethan said. "Marcus," she confirmed. "Your wife may have been complicit, or she may have been manipulated into it. We'll find out. But this has his fingerprints all over it. Legal expertise, financial planning, strategic timing." David pulled up another document on his laptop. "And here's the thing. We found 3 other cases in California with similar patterns. Men working overseas in oil and gas, divorced through default judgments during their offshore rotations, properties transferred, ongoing payments redirected. Different wives, different locations, but the same law firm behind the filings." "Marcus's firm," Ethan said. "Marcus's firm, David confirmed. Ethan stared at the web of connections they'd mapped out across the hotel room. Strings of evidence linking dates and deposits and documents into an undeniable pattern. This wasn't a marriage that had fallen apart. This wasn't a wife who'd fallen in love with someone else. This was a system, a mechanism, a way to systematically strip assets from men who were too far away to defend themselves. And Lena had been either the architect or the instrument. Either way, Ethan realized the man he'd been when he walked into that house 3 days ago, the man who still believed in redemption through sacrifice, was gone. What remained was colder, sharper, more dangerous. The truth is darker than we thought. What would you do with this information? Drop your strategy in the comments below. Subscribe and hit that notification bell because the next chapter is when Ethan fights back, and it's going to be brutal. If you're ready to see justice served, smash that like button right now. The courtroom was nothing like the dramatic scenes from television. No soaring ceilings or ornate wood paneling. Just fluorescent lights, beige walls, and the quiet hum of the ventilation system. Ethan sat beside Rebecca Chun at the plaintiff's table, his hands folded calmly in his lap. He'd worn a simple navy suit, not expensive, but clean and professional. The kind of suit a man who'd worked honest labor for 7 years would wear. Across the aisle, Lena sat beside a different attorney now. Not Marcus. Marcus had his own table, his own legal team, positioned carefully at a distance from Lena, as if proximity might suggest collaboration. But Ethan knew the truth. They all did now. Judge Patricia Morse entered, and everyone rose. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back severely and reading glasses perched on her nose. She'd seen every scheme, every manipulation, every attempt to game the system. Her reputation was legendary, fair but absolutely intolerant of fraud. "Be seated," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 30 years on the bench. Rebecca stood, approaching the podium with a thick folder of documents. "Your Honor, we're here today to present evidence of systematic fraud in the matter of Hale versus Hale, case number FL 2024-8847. My client, Ethan Hale, was unlawfully divorced through a default judgment obtained through deliberate misrepresentation and fraudulent service of process." The judge's eyes sharpened. "Counselor, those are serious allegations." "Yes, Your Honor, and we have serious evidence." What followed was 2 hours of methodical destruction. David Park, the financial analyst, took the stand first. His testimony was dry, technical, filled with account numbers and transaction dates. But the story it told was devastating. He displayed charts showing money transfers continuing 11 months past the divorce decree. He traced funds through shell companies with names like Property Management Services LLC and Renovation Consultants Incorporated, entities that existed only on paper, registered to a single address that happened to be Marcus Reed's law office. He showed where Ethan's money had gone, not to legitimate contractors, but into accounts that then dispersed to personal expenses. Designer furniture purchases, luxury travel, a lease payment on a Mercedes that was now parked in Ethan's driveway, registered to Lena, but purchased with his money. Lena's attorney objected twice. Judge Morse overruled both times, her expression growing colder with each transaction David revealed. Then Rebecca presented the service of process documents. "Your Honor, the divorce papers were allegedly sent via certified mail to my client's work address in Saudi Arabia." She pulled up an email address on the screen. "This address, email protected." She paused for effect. "My client never worked for Arabian Gulf Services. He worked for Meridian Energy Solutions. This email address was deactivated in 2021, 4 years before the divorce filing. Anyone with access to Mr. Hale's actual contact information would have known this." She clicked to another slide showing Lena's phone records. "Mrs. Hale called my client's correct work number 17 times during the period these papers were allegedly being sent. She had his current contact information. Yet the legal documents were sent to an address that guaranteed they would never be received." Marcus's attorney stood. "Your Honor, this could simply be an administrative error." "Could it?" Rebecca interrupted, her voice sharp. "Let's examine the court hearing dates." She displayed Ethan's offshore rotation schedule, verified by his employer, stamped with official company seals, cross-referenced with immigration entry and exit stamps. Every single hearing date fell during a period when Ethan was on a deepwater oil platform with zero internet connectivity and limited satellite phone access reserved for emergencies only. These dates weren't random, Your Honor. Someone with access to my client's confidential work schedule deliberately chose times when he would be unreachable. The judge leaned forward. Who had access to this schedule? His emergency contact, Rebecca said quietly. His wife, Lena Hale. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of typing from the court reporter. Rebecca wasn't finished. Your Honor, we've identified 3 other cases with identical patterns. All clients of Marcus Reed's law firm. All expatriate workers in oil and gas. All divorced through default judgments obtained during their offshore rotations. All had property transferred and ongoing financial obligations that continued past the divorce decree. She placed a document in front of the judge. This is a pattern of predation, Your Honor. Mr. Reed identified vulnerable targets. Men working overseas with assets, but limited ability to respond to legal actions, and systematically extracted wealth using his legal expertise. Marcus's face remained impassive, but Ethan noticed his jaw tighten. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair. Judge Morse spent 10 minutes reviewing the documents in silence. The only sound was the turning of pages. Finally, she removed her reading glasses and looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Reed, I'm suspending your license to practice law in the state of California, effective immediately, pending a full criminal investigation by the state bar and the district attorney's office. Marcus's attorney shot to his feet. Your Honor, I'm not finished. The judge's voice was ice. I'm freezing all assets involved in this case, pending a full forensic audit. That includes the property at 847 Willow Creek Lane, all accounts that received funds from Mr. Hale, and any entities registered to Mr. Reed that were involved in these transactions. She turned to the divorce decree. The default judgment in Hale versus Hale is hereby vacated. The divorce proceedings are frozen pending a complete review. All property transfers are reversed. Mrs. Hale, you are ordered to vacate the premises at 847 Willow Creek Lane within 72 hours. Lena made a sound, not quite a gasp, more like something breaking inside her chest. Furthermore, Judge Morse continued, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for potential criminal charges of fraud, conspiracy, and theft by false pretenses. She looked at Ethan for the first time. Mr. Hale, I cannot give you back 7 years of your life, but I can ensure that justice is served to the fullest extent the law allows. And she brought down her gavel. The sound seemed to shatter something in Lena. She collapsed forward, her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs that echoed through the quiet courtroom. But she wasn't crying for Ethan. She wasn't crying out of remorse or guilt. She was crying because she'd finally understood. She'd never been in control. She'd been a tool, a mechanism in Marcus's system, used just as thoroughly as Ethan had been, just in a different way. Marcus stood, his composure finally cracking, his attorney whispering urgently in his ear. Security was already moving toward him. Ethan watched it all from his seat, his expression unchanged. He felt no satisfaction, no vindication, no sense of victory, just confirmation. The system had tried to break him, extract him, erase him while he was too far away to defend himself. But systems he'd learned in 7 years of oil field work could be understood, analyzed, dismantled, and he just torn this one apart, bolt by bolt. Rebecca touched his arm gently. We won. Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes still on Lena's shaking form across the aisle. Yes, he said quietly. We did. But as he walked out of the courtroom into the California sunshine, past reporters already gathering at the courthouse steps, Ethan knew the truth. He hadn't won his life back. He'd just proven it had been stolen. And sometimes that was all a man could ask for. Justice has been served. But at what cost? Tell me in the comments what you think happens to Ethan now. Does he rebuild? Or is he forever changed? Subscribe and turn on notifications because we're not done with this story yet. And if this chapter gave you chills, hit that like button right now. The keys felt heavy in Ethan's hand as he stood on the sidewalk outside 847 Willow Creek Lane for the second time in 3 weeks. The house was legally his again. The court order had been executed. The locks had been changed. Every piece of designer furniture, every expensive light fixture, every trace of the life that had been built in his absence had been removed per the asset seizure. The house stood empty now, stripped back to bare walls and hardwood floors that echoed when you walked through them. Ethan had come to collect his belongings. The few boxes Lena had left in the garage, items from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. He brought a moving company, but as he stood there staring at the charcoal gray exterior and the stone pavers leading to the door, he realized something. He couldn't live here. Not because of what had happened, though that certainly haunted every corner, but because some victories aren't meant to be lived inside. Some things you fight for not because you want them, but because you refuse to let them be stolen. He won the house back, but he didn't want it. Ethan, her voice came from behind him, tentative and small. He turned to find Lena standing at the edge of the property, her car parked at the curb. She looked different, older somehow, though only weeks had passed. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, a far cry from the silk robe and designer aesthetic he'd encountered that first day. Lena. He acknowledged her with a nod, but didn't move closer. I heard you were here. I wanted to. She paused, her hands twisting together. I wanted to talk to you. To explain. There's nothing to explain. The court explained everything. Not about that. About us. About what happened. She took a few steps forward, her eyes pleading. Ethan, I was lonely. 7 years is a long time. The house felt empty. I felt empty. I know that doesn't excuse what I did, but you replaced me. The words stopped her mid-sentence. The loneliness I understand, Ethan continued, his voice calm but firm. The distance, the strain, the difficulty of a marriage stretched across continents. I understand all of that. What I don't understand is the system, the deliberate deception, the calculated erasure. Marcus said it would be cleaner this way, she whispered. He said you'd be angry if I told you, that you'd make it difficult, that this way we could both move on without me knowing I'd been moved on from. Ethan's laugh was bitter. Lena, you didn't just meet someone else. You divorced me in secret, took everything I'd worked for, and used my own money to build a life with my replacement. That wasn't loneliness. That was a choice. A series of choices. Tears streamed down her face now. I know. God, Ethan, I know. I've replayed it 1,000 times in my head. If I could go back. You can't. He said it without cruelty, just finality. And even if you could, it wouldn't matter. Why not? He looked at her fully then. This woman he'd loved for 12 years, married for 9, sacrificed 7 years for. And he felt nothing. No anger, no love, no resentment, just the quiet acknowledgement of something that had ended long before he'd known it. You didn't lose me when I left for Saudi Arabia, he said quietly. You lost me when you replaced me, when you stopped seeing our separation as temporary and started treating it like I was already gone. Everything that happened after that was just logistics. Lena's face crumpled, and for a moment, she looked like she might collapse right there on the sidewalk. I'm sorry, she sobbed. Ethan, I'm so sorry. For all of it. For not being strong enough. For listening to Marcus. For not fighting harder for us. I know you are, he said, and he meant it. But sorry doesn't rebuild 7 years. It doesn't give me back the sacrifice. It doesn't undo the betrayal. He turned back to the house, pulling out his phone. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice small and broken. I'm selling it, he said simply. Already have a realtor lined up. Should close within 60 days. Selling it. She sounded genuinely shocked. But you fought so hard to get it back. I fought to not let it be stolen, he corrected. That's different than wanting to keep it. This house stopped being ours the moment you decided I was gone. I'm just making that official. He gestured to the moving truck. I'm taking what's mine, the things that matter before all this. The rest can be sold with the house. Where will you go? For the first time since the conversation started, Ethan smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was genuine. I don't know yet, and that's okay. He walked toward the truck, where the movers were loading the last few boxes. Photo albums from before everything went wrong, his engineering textbooks, a few pieces of furniture that had belonged to his parents. "Ethan," Lena called after him. He paused, but didn't turn around. "I hope you find what you're looking for." "I'm not looking for anything," he said over his shoulder. "That's the difference." 3 weeks later, Ethan stood in an airport terminal again. Not LAX this time. SFO, San Francisco International. His boarding pass showed a one-way ticket to Singapore, where a consulting firm had offered him a position that paid better than the oil fields, but kept him on solid ground. He had one carry-on bag, no checked luggage, no suitcase full of 7 years of accumulated hope and desperation. The house had sold in 41 days to a young couple expecting their first child. He'd watched them walk through it during the showing, the woman's hand on her belly, both of them talking excitedly about which room would be the nursery. He'd felt nothing but relief that the house would hold life again instead of the ghost of a marriage. The money from the sale, combined with the restitution the court had ordered, had given him enough for a fresh start. More than enough, actually. Around him, the airport bustled with travelers, families reuniting, business people rushing to connections, couples saying goodbye. All the human drama of arrival and departure playing out in an endless loop. But Ethan felt calm, centered. This time, he wasn't running from loss. He wasn't chasing an illusion of home. He wasn't sacrificing himself for a future that someone else would inhabit. This time, he was choosing himself. The departure board updated. His gate was boarding. Ethan adjusted the strap on his carry-on and walked toward the future. Not the one he'd planned, not the one he'd sacrificed for, but the one he was building himself. Coming home, he'd learned, didn't mean going back. It meant finally walking forward, without betrayal, without lies, and without a life that no longer belonged to him. He didn't look back as he handed his boarding pass to the gate agent. Some doors close, some chapters end, and sometimes the only way to truly come home is to leave behind everything you thought home was supposed to be. This is how Ethan's story ends. Not with revenge, not with reconciliation, but with something harder, moving forward. What do you think? Did Ethan make the right choice? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more stories like this. And show some love by hitting that like button right now. Thank you for following Ethan's journey. Until next time.